Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the October 11th, 2017 meeting of the City of Brentwood Planning and Zoning Commission. If you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Michael Daming,
Here.
Mark Cavaza,
Here.
Jennifer Hansen,
Here.
Rebecca Jacobs,
Here.
Clint Lewis,
Here.
Art Nelson,
Here.
John Jernberger is here, John Ritter,
Here.
Lisa Shirley,
Here.
Tom Schiffler.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nuremberger. Any changes, revisions to the September 13th meeting minutes? Seeing none, they'll stand as approved by acclamation. We have two items under old business this evening and none under new business. The first item under old business is an application for site plan review and a conditional use permit for the property located at 2301 South Brentwood Boulevard to construct a 909 square foot drive-through custard shop and accessory parking. Ms. Jacobs, do you have something you'd like to say for the record?
Yes, I'm involved in this project, so I'm going to excuse myself from this part of the meeting.
Very good. Let the record reflect that Ms. Jacobs has recused herself from the discussion on this application. Is the applicant here this evening? Will you please step forward, sir? And the commission will be reminded that it's taken up this custard shop application at its regular meeting in August. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then at a subcommittee meeting in
August.
So, sir, if you could remind me your name, and if you could just let the commission know how you have taken into account to the recommendations of the city consultants and of the Planning and Zoning Commission subcommittee, and let us know how your application's changed since the last time we saw it.
Sure. My name is Ryan Cerniglia with TWM, and I'll be representing our client, which is Chris Thornton.
Okay. If you could just walk us through how the application and your site plan has changed since the last time we looked
Sure.
at it.
I'll just give a little quick timeline. I think we initially met on, on August 9th was our initial presentation to the board. Since then, we met with the Board of Adjustments on August 24th. At that point, they granted us variance from setback requirements on the west side of the property, landscape buffer on the west side, and site coverage. And on August 30th, we met with the subcommittee with some of the board members here. To give a little overview on the project, again, we're at 2301 South Brentwood. That's southwest corner, White Avenue in Brentwood, zoned as a PD district with residential to the west of our development. We are a drive-through and walk-up ice cream shop, one-story building. We have 9 parking stalls, 1 ADA, ingress, egress into our parking off of White Avenue, no entrance off of Brentwood. However, our drive-through will exit Brentwood and head southbound only. Since our subcommittee meeting, we did receive information from a traffic review done by CBB, the city's traffic engineer. At that point, we reviewed all of their comments and assessed the comments, and have since addressed all the issues that they had and presented that on the recent plans that you guys have received. In addition, all other comments that came out of the subcommittee meeting has been addressed and placed onto our plan, and we accept all those comments. We are, just as additional information, going to the Board of Aldermen later this month for a conditional use permit for drive-through for our facility.
And it's my understanding that the city's landscape architect also reviewed your application?
Correct. We did receive that a couple days ago. The plans in front of you that you have do not address the landscaping plan, since we didn't have time to fully turn that over. I believe Lisa will talk a little bit more about some of the comments that they had and the concerns with ordinance and exceptions that we're looking to have. Any comments that she doesn't have, we plan on addressing all of those landscaping comments as well.
Okay. Ms. Kirkemeyer, can you bring the commission up to date on whether or not they have in fact incorporated all of the subcommittee's recommendations?
Right. I think in terms of the recommendations from the site plan subcommittee, those have been addressed, or they've been included as conditions in still staff's recommendation at this time. As was mentioned, the detailed landscape plan was submitted last week, or I'm sorry, the week before, and our landscape reviewer, Andy Frankie, reviewed the application, and he submitted the comments that we included in your staff report dated October 5th. So the one that I will point out, well, we can go through all of them. They have or can be addressed. So the first one that Mr. Frankie had brought to our attention was in regard to the landscape buffer strip that would be placed along the north property line or along White Avenue. So it did talk in review comments to ensure that the perimeter buffer strip is at least 10 feet wide. And the plan as it's shown, the buffer is about 3.5 to 6 feet wide. So this has always been on the site plan since day one. So it hasn't been reduced since we initially saw it. And in terms of Ryan's comment still about then, in terms of how this is treated, this, the requirement for it to be 10 foot wide is actually called out in the development standards for the parking requirements. It's not in the plan development zoning or the use regulations. So there is a section of the code under your authorization for just site plan review. You know, you can review that and approve it as it's shown. So as Ryan also said, though, there were actually variances that were part of the use regulations in the PD that had to go through the Board of Adjustment, but that was taken care of, as he had mentioned, on August 24th, and those variances were approved. So that has been addressed. There was a comment about adding 90 square feet of additional landscape area in the interior, and it looks apparently like that could maybe be done either in front of the building on the north side or also around the trash enclosure. So that should be able to be accommodated. And, you know, a lot of these, again, like in terms of the placement of the fence, by our own requirements, it does have to be 15 feet back from the public right-of-way. So, and again, just, you know, the size of the proposed plant materials, all this can be addressed. So I don't really think we have any outstanding issues with the landscape review. And then the second part then that we were also waiting on is if we would get any preliminary review comments back from St. Louis County Department of Transportation. So this parcel already was developed, and so it has existing, or it was developed previously, so it has existing curb cuts that the applicant is going to be using. So the question kind of becomes, if you use existing curb cuts, do you need to get any other type of review or approvals from St. Louis County Department of Transportation? So the fact that they'll still be working on right-of-way when the project would develop, if it receives approval, it still would need a permit from the County Department of Transportation to do that. And the only recommendation that they stated at this point in time was the existing curb cut that is along South Brentwood Boulevard. It is wider than what would be for the proposed access or apron for the drive-through lane as it exits or egresses onto South Brentwood. So their recommendation is that that width of that existing curb cut does get reduced to the size of the drive-through lane. So again, that can be, you know, done, and that was a recommendation from them. When this project, if it receives approval, gets further along, when the designed, engineered site plan is done, then that officially goes to St. Louis County Department of Transportation for review. So, but those are the only, I think, new comments. Otherwise, anything else that's transpired since the site plan subcommittee has met was updated in the staff report, and so that's about, I think, all that we have that's new.
May I speak?
Sure.
In regards to the curb cut off of Brentwood, we do not plan on doing any right-of-way improvements along Brentwood. The only right-of-way improvements we plan on doing is our entrance off of White Avenue. So we don't anticipate doing any disturbance in that area. We are planning on having our drive-through exit that current curb cut onto Brentwood, but we would have fencing and signage to eliminate anybody from entering onto from Brentwood into the drive-through area.
Okay, and Mr. Cerniglia?
Yep.
Sir? And you're familiar with the recommendations that the subcommittee made, and it looks like they've all been incorporated into Ms. Kirkmeyer's staff report with a couple other recommendations specifically addressing that landscape plan. And you're amenable to incorporating all of those into your site plan?
Yes, with regards to what Lisa
Right.
had mentioned, correct.
Okay. Questions from commissioners? Ms. Hanson?
Thank you, Mr. Daming. I missed the last subcommittee meeting, and I just want to make sure I understand. Did you guys have the traffic study at the time of the site plan committee? You did?
We were
So when I'm looking at the site plan, or pardon me, when I'm looking at the traffic study, under the subsection of drive-through and site circulation, can somebody take me through this, how it indicates the developer expects 60-second headways between vehicles, and there was some concern that if headways were longer than expected, particularly during peak times, that the queues were going to increase quickly. How do we get the 60-second headway between, and how did the subcommittee, it wasn't apparent to me from the notes, how did the subcommittee, if at all, address that issue? Like, how do we get a 60-second? Is that just an industry standard? Is that something that, is this a franchise that I'm not aware of?
I believe that's an industry standard, but I didn't do the review. We're just taking their recommendations.
All right, it's page 5 of 9.
Well, it's not a franchise, but I believe that question was specifically asked of Mr. Cannon during the subcommittee meeting.
Okay.
For those of you that were at the subcommittee meeting, correct me if I'm wrong, and he did indicate it was an industry standard, and he did look at different ice cream shops. So
Okay.
I believe that was the case. I believe that's what he had said. Is that, Ms. Kirkmeyer, is that your recollection?
I don't see it actually like something specifically referenced, but generally that is what they use, is just what industry standards are, and it's based on
Well-
the hours of operation, the size of the establishment.
Is the developer here? Maybe he or she could answer. The developer expects 60-second headways if they did that. And I'm not sure whether the applicant is the mayor or if it's the LLC that, I don't know who the developer is, if it's Mayor Thornton. Okay. Would you mind?
No,
Thank you.
It's hard to be in my position and also developing a project, so I didn't want to say anything if I didn't have to. But yeah, actually, so Mr. Cannon gave us a spreadsheet. CVB provided us a spreadsheet, which is actually a traffic circulation model for a drive-through. And it's got a couple of different variables, one of them being the headway. And the default in that model was 45 seconds, actually, which is a typical headway for a fast food restaurant. Given that we're not food, given that I think our prep times will be, but we use 60 seconds as an extension. We actually ran that model all the way up to 1.5 minutes of headway, 90 seconds of
Right.
headway, and the queues did not expand beyond 6 or 7 cars, which would still be on property. So, I mean, what Mr. Cannon had asked me as the developer for was a worst-case scenario, our busiest day of the year, the busiest time of day, what would we anticipate our incoming traffic to be? And I told him, here's if we do this well, it'll be fantastic. We worked with those numbers to produce the numbers you see in front of you.
I appreciate that. And my understanding is the peak hours for the shop are different than, peak driving hours otherwise.
Yeah,
correct?
so that
They're
was
later.
some information that was presented at the site plan subcommittee. I actually went on Google and found the busy hours for the nearest 4 ice cream shops. And they showed a peak between 7 and 10 p.m. with the highest traffic between the 8 and 9 o'clock hour. And so what we did was we took that peak and we made our traffic look like that, right? And then assuming that peak level, what we did was use that to calculate the queuing on the drive-through model.
Thank you, I appreciate that, that helps me. I have one other question, I don't know who to answer, but looking at the traffic study again, there is a recommendation that potentially all employees should park off-site, and I noticed that the site plan committee, the subcommittee's recommendation was 1 parking spot. Can you just give me a background as to how we got there? Just the 5-second summary would help.
So the parking requirement, so the project meets the parking requirement for the size of this establishment and for the use, it's 9 spaces.
Right.
So when we have a parking requirement, it is supposed to take into account what the employees' needs would be as well as customer needs. So that's a total of 9 spaces. So again, this business is expected to be somewhat seasonal. So there'll be more employees that would be needed at some point. So that was what the general conversation was that when the establishment would be during the peak times, that it would be encouraged to have the developers seek some other kind of parking arrangement with one of the adjoining commercial property owners, which joint parking agreements are permissible by our code provisions, so.
So is the condition then to limit it to one parking space per employee, or per the traffic study where it says it's highly likely that some or all of the employees will need to park off-site during peak hours? Is there a
Well-
determination that it's a one?
And I'll let, someone else kind of, again, my recollection was that we came up with what would be the norm though, or typical would be the one employee that would actually be there all the time. And
What-
that
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
no, that's all right, but just, that's how the one space still, so that when it's in just its regular time, the one employee would be able to still park on site.
Okay.
What Mr. Cannon had said is actually that, we should limit it to one employee during the peak times, which are that 7 to 10 timeframe. I can tell you that we are certainly for employees, I think it's very likely we'll get off-site parking agreements with one of the two commercial neighbors, possibly even with respect to additional customer traffic. Also, our employees are anticipated to be Brentwood teenagers, and they will be walking to work.
Very good. All right, thank you, I appreciate that.
Any other questions from commissioners? Is there any member of the audience that would like to address the commission on this application? Seeing none, and if there's no other discussion from the commissioners, the chair will entertain a motion. Mr. Nurnberger?
I'll make a motion that we approve based upon the site plan modifications that are approved by the subcommittee meeting minutes and the plan that is set in front of us.
Second.
And Mr. Nurnberger, does your motion include an incorporation of the recommendations of staff in the most recent staff report?
Yes, exactly.
Any further discussion? Roll call? Yeah, Ms. Kirkemeyer?
The second, please, the second on the motion.
Mr.
Thank
Shipley,
you.
that's the second.
Got a distinct voice.
Mark Favazza,
Yes.
Jennifer Hansen,
Yes.
Rebecca Jacobs, oh, I'm sorry, she's abstaining. Clint Lewis,
Yes.
Hart Nelson,
Yes.
John Number is yes, John Ritter,
Yes.
Lisa Sherling,
Yes.
Tom Shipley.
Yes.
We have a, Moses passes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Nurnberger, and thank you, Mr. Cerniglia and
Mr. Chairman,
Mayor Thornton.
we do
Yeah,
have another commissioner who joined.
Oh, I'm sorry.
forgot Mr. Hart.
Oh, didn't see you in there. Sorry about it. Who's that?
Yes.
Oh, Michael Hart. Okay.
All right, duly noted.
Yeah.
All right, thank you for your application. We
Sorry
look
about
forward to
that.
the addition to our community.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, the next item under old business is an application for site plan review for property located at 8212 Manchester to construct a parking lot. Is the applicant here? Ms. Paula? Yes. Come on up. Remind me your last name, Paula.
Arbuthnot, A-R-B-U-T-H-N-O-T.
All right, maybe we'll just keep with Ms. Paula. Is Mr. Aston here tonight?
No, sir, he is in Chicago.
Okay. Chair, or the commission will recall that this application as well has been taken up at a couple different meetings, and most recently at the September subcommittee meeting. And the subcommittee made several recommendations of the applicant at that subcommittee meeting, and have each of those recommendations been incorporated into the new site plan? Ms.
To the
Paula?
best of my ability, with Mr. Aston's reservations on one point.
So is your answer that they all have been incorporated except for one point?
Yes.
Okay, and which point is that?
The committee, or not the committee, the staff, forgive me, has asked for a 2-inch overlay on the asphalt. We have submitted, Mr. Aston right now just wants to do significant patching, what's the word I'm?
Sealing?
Yeah, and then put a reseal over the whole thing. I'm submitting have submitted 2 pictures for your review. By the time we get done, we're going to be pretty close to a 2-inch overlay. If the staff and the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission will humor me for just a couple of paragraphs of a speech, I have a point that I'd like to make. Good evening. It's good to see you all here again. And my purpose tonight is actually twofold. Please forgive my helmet head. Hard hats are not very becoming until you have roof rafters coming down on your head. I have just come from a job site on a nearly 200-year-old house that we demolished in House Springs, trying to decide how many of the logs were still good as my client, Brad Bruce, raises the finished floor level out of the floodplain of Heads Creek. I left that job site to come straight here to talk about my other client, Ken Aston, who has approximately 2/3 to one of his half-acre lot currently sitting in a floodplain. Shortly before this meeting was scheduled to start, I took a call from State Representative Elaine Gannon, who is working with me to draft new legislation for flood mitigation and stormwater control. I am here tonight to implore with Brentwood to join efforts with our flooding cause. Mr. Mayor? While Elaine goes to her city meeting to publicly chastise the city administrator who wants to put in soccer parks and not fix the flooded neighborhoods. Next week, I hope to be back in Jeff City talking with Elaine's research staff on the final version of this House bill so that I have time to campaign it before the January session starts, which is now only 11 weeks away. The last time this was tried in Missouri was over 20 years ago. This time, we hope to present a bill so that both citizen and business benefits. Nobody is asking me to do this, but it needs to be done, and I believe these goals are the same ones that Brentwood and my client has. Ken wants to build something nice eventually, but is limited until Brentwood can fix your creek. Meanwhile, Brentwood has been dumped on with 22 municipalities worth of stormwater. What Ken is wanting to do right now is temporary. The curbing for the landscape, please, it's temporary. If MoDOT comes through and widens or changes the drainage path of water, I simply cannot design anything that will carry it. Same thing with the parking lot. It's temporary. That's the reason he's asking for relief for the 2-inch overlay. We're going to be doing a fair amount of patching and resealing and restriping on this parking lot. But because we're in a floodplain, and until I can get a permanent client in there and work with the city of Brentwood extensively, I am imploring to help solve your flooding problems as well as my clients. I am asking relief for the 2-inch overlay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Paula. Ms. Kirkemeyer, where is this 2-inch overlay and milling requirement coming from?
So I had discussed with our Public Works Director. We both went out and looked at the site, and the photographs that actually Paula had provided is what's there. So it was a determination by our Public Works Director that what you see in these photos and the parking lot condition is too deteriorated and that it cannot be patched. If you tried to patch with cold patch or something, it would just buckle and come up again. So the 2-inch mill and overlay is even what the city would do in terms of just whenever we resurface something, just to make sure that, again, we don't have problems with it just continually breaking down and cracking. It really is basically the minimum. What was provided by the petitioner in the very beginning was a paving specification that was way over the top, if you remember,
Yes.
and would have actually met just our standard parking requirement specification for a permanent parking lot. But at the last meeting, again, we had found the provision of this temporary use of a temporary parking lot. So we're trying to compromise, but that's really kind of where we stand. It's what the city would do as the basic minimum is a 2-inch mill and overlay. And I guess the fear would be, again, when it can't be patched, that even just parking the cars on there, that it's just going to break up. We would have situations then where weeds and, so forth could possibly, obviously get through the pavement, and we would not appreciate probably the appearance of it, so.
If I may add, now that I have mouthed exactly what Mr. Aston has asked me to mention, as I look at this parking lot, by the time I get done with patching bids, I suspect I'm going to be at your minimum standards. But I can't say that. Mr. Aston didn't ask me to say that.
You know this is on YouTube.
Well, Miss Paula, I mean, your original submission for the parking lot, that was not going to be a permanent solution in the first place, was it?
Mr. Aston didn't communicate with me fully what his desires were with this parking lot. I knew what the minimum standards were for off-street parking on a commercial parking lot by St. Louis County highway standards. If I have to go get permits from St. Louis County and from MoDOT, I fully expected I was going to have to put that down. He changed in midstream. Forgive me. As I look at this parking lot, and he asked me to stand in front of you guys and request that there not be a 2-inch overlay, by the time I get done, that's pretty much what I'm going to have.
Okay. So it doesn't sound like you have too much of an objection to the requirement of our Public Works Director.
I don't personally. The problem is that if I come out of this meeting with that as a requirement, Mr. Aston probably will not do any of this. That's the practicality of it.
So then we'll just have a code enforcement situation?
It may lead to that. I'm imploring that we find some way to word this that allows me to go get a bid and do what I need to do. Because frankly, folks, I need you. I'm hoping you need me.
Yeah, well, I remember the subcommittee worked with you to a significant extent, and the subcommittee was willing to waive some of the side and the back landscape buffers
And
and,
the landscape plan as well.
correct,
Yeah.
as a
So-
formal
I-
landscape
Yeah,
plan.
there's,
I'm understanding of that.
So I think you can take solace in that, but I just don't know how we can reject the recommendation of our Public Works Director, but I'll open it up to the commission for questions. Mr. Nurnberger?
I've got a lot of experience in parking lots, and this has to be overlaid. There's no way that this can be used for parking. Yeah, even if you crack fill, you would have to crack fill the whole place. So there's no way we can do it without doing overlay. There's no way. You can't patch all these holes and have it be, next winter it's gonna break up when they drive cars up. So it's like, we can't do that. So,
Ms. Hanson?
I think the argument, or Mr. Essen's argument, would be more compelling if there were some extreme price differential between, if you can make the argument that this being a temporary parking lot, we've got a 180-day potentially, something going on, then I could get behind it. But if you're telling me that the patching that you intend to do is going to basically bump up against the 2-inch requirement or suggestion of the Public Works Director, it's hard for me to wane from that. So have you gotten bids? Can you tell me what the cost differential is between?
No, I cannot get bids right now because,
I don't need to know why.
Well,
Just whether you do or don't have bids.
yeah, I do not have bids at this time. I am anticipating that I could find 3 asphalt contractors, and in my construction experience, they're basically going to tell me what we already know here this evening.
Okay.
It's an education process for Mr. Aston, so I don't know exactly how to approach this. I'm open to creative wording on a reply. Code enforcement is indeed part of the answer that may come back from this planning and zoning, but I'm kind of hoping that I can walk out of here and say, why don't we find out what the bids are going to be both ways? And that might be the best way to approach this. I don't know if that's a reasonable approach, or if that's bending the rules too much, but I'm going to throw it out there.
Ms. Kirkemeyer?
I had asked the Public Works Director if he could provide a ballpark figure. So a unit price probably on a 2-inch mill overlay job would be about $1.40 per square foot. And it's estimated that the area to be paved is 0.32 acres. So that roughly does come out probably, $18,000, $20,000, just to give you some idea.
He's nowhere near on that on rental costs, nowhere near.
Well, Ms. Arbuthnot, I think you understand what the Public Works Director is requiring here. The commission can do whatever it would like, but do you want to withdraw your application at this time and look at this some more?
I don't know.
Okay, other questions from commissioners?
I-
Yeah, Mr. Nurnberger.
I just would say, I really can't approve a parking lot in this location without having overlay. I can't vote for it, so
Well, I
I just
understand
want
that.
to make sure you understand that.
Yeah.
So if you vote for it, I'm going to vote against it right now. If you say you come back and determine that is, you're going to do it, then you can, if you withdraw, you can come back. If it goes to vote, it goes to the city council next week or whatever, then you're going to have a lot that you can't use.
How about if I withdraw and come back with bids?
That would be fine, I think.
You're certainly free to withdraw, and you're certainly free to get bids. You know, I have
It would-
no idea what the implications of that would be.
Yeah.
I think Mr. Aston probably needs that kind of education, it sounds like.
Okay, is that the course of action you'd like to take?
I'm going to have to.
Okay. So that's, Ms. Arbuthnot, that's what confirm that you're going to withdraw your application and you plan on resubmitting at a later date?
As quickly as possible, yes.
Well, we do appreciate your cooperation at the subcommittee meeting and in the meetings to date, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you,
I
ma'am.
hope we work together on flooding in
I
the
hope,
future.
I hope so
Thank
too.
you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Okay, I see no new business this evening. Aldermanic report. I see no alderman. City planners report. Ms. Birkemeyer?
Here.
He's not an alderman.
The only report that I have, as we talked about last time, I gave you an update of where we were at with the comprehensive plan. I had talked to the consultant again last week, and he assured me that the second draft would be delivered by the end of this week. So once that happens, again, I'm sure we'll get our discussions again going with the Planning and Zoning Commission as well as the Comp Plan Advisory Committee. So I'll let you know.
Questions for Ms. Kirkemeyer? October 25th site plan. We have no need for a site plan subcommittee?
Nope.
Okay. Rationale, Ms. Kirkemeyer, you can handle that, the one rationale. Any other business? Entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll
Motion.
make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Nurnberger, second by Mr. Lewis to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, stand adjourned.